Guys, today Carrie's evaluating me. Peer evaluation thing basically makes you a better teacher, right? So it's a reflection type thing. So don't be weird about it, okay? She's just here to help me with what I'm doing. So Riley's going to be filming as well, so we can take a look at it. So when we started building these platonic solids, right, we were talking about shape to form translation. We were talking about how to take flat stuff and then turn it into a three-dimensional form. We talked about Plato's different calculations that he made over here and all that kind of stuff. So you should be close to having your 5 done. And now it's time to start talking about what we're going to do with the infographic one, or the one that, you know, I asked you guys to think about a process that you could illustrate, right? So the overall goal here is that we want a product that is like a handheld infographic. Normally they're two-dimensional. They're like posters, that kind of thing, a website kind of information and stuff. But I want the idea to be very interactive. So we'll talk more about strategy a little bit later, but it needs to be well designed, and you need to make sure that you're choosing the right platonic solid for the right idea, okay? So we'll get into that here, right? So we're packaging complex information into simple information. So I don't know if you guys have heard this quote by Picasso, okay? And I think it's cleaned up a little bit because the first time I read it, it was a lot more plain English, but saying that he's doing stuff that he can't do. That's how he gets to do it. That's how I remember reading it, but then I found it this way. Basically, you know, I didn't like come out of the womb knowing how to do this stuff, and I didn't have a huge interest in geometry really at all. I'm not a mathematician, but I got curious, right? And I thought this is something I need to learn because I thought those are really interesting, complex forms. And the more that I delved into it and learned about it, I went online, I looked at different stuff. I talked to some teachers that were math teachers, and I asked them, you know, how do you do all these kind of things? And when I found out they were equilateral shapes and you just build them all together, the angles don't matter, everything goes together perfectly. It's been this thing that I understand really well. Now, you guys remember when I was talking about the equilateral pentagons, right? Like, that's definitely something I had memorized. I have to go back and brush up on my skills. So one thing I think about being an artist and about being a teacher is that we have both passion and curiosity. And you don't have to be a teacher to teach. I'm always teaching, right? Everything can be a teachable moment, as it were. It's my firm belief that everybody has something to learn from somebody else, and everybody has something they can teach to somebody else. You guys can teach me a lot about different things, and I always try to learn from my students if I can. So Morgan Freeman says something really similar, but I kind of thought it was a little more blunt, right? So I'm always trying new things and learning new things. If there isn't any more that you can learn, go off and die. So I was like, oh, he's kind of a jerk. You think about Morgan Freeman, he's usually that nice, calm narrator or whatever, National Geographic. But he's pretty blunt here, right? So the curiosity aspect of being an artist, I think, is pretty important because that's going to lead you guys into new discoveries, right? And it's going to make it to where you can become instructive in certain things. So that's kind of what this project's about, and that's what infographics have to do with. So you guys each have a piece of paper, right? And usually I ask you guys to write down the parameters for the project. So these 6 things here, okay? Really simple. Number 1, brainstorm a complex process, right? So infographics, examples here, right? Some good ones, some bad ones. We're going to look at several. I found a great video on what makes a good infographic. So you're instructing a process, a big concept, something complex, right? But in order to teach that, you've got to break it down into manageable steps. Like when we did draw that pentagon, right? We had to go through it a couple of times. We had to practice. So the manageable steps were, okay, now we draw a circle. Now we take point A to point B. We draw another circle. Now we've got point C. I couldn't follow it if we didn't have manageable steps. Then we're going to illustrate those steps. And visual communication is the main thing here. You can use words if you feel like you need to represent your ideas, but I don't want the words to be the thing that actually is the instructive element. I would much rather you do this with imagery, symbolism, that kind of thing. Try to make it more of an illustration thing. In this class so far, we've been doing that, like from day 1. We've been talking about how to communicate our ideas in a visual format to people. Everybody else can talk, listen, write stuff down, whatever, but as artists, we have this unique disposition to where we can communicate with an extra sort of level of intimacy with visual communication. So that's kind of what that's about in terms of why infographics work, I think, especially with artists, because we can can make it aesthetically beautiful, and we can package a lot of information in smaller doses. So yeah, text, words, those are okay if you need that. The most important thing is to figure out which platonic solid is going to work best with your idea, right? So number one, I think about the sides, right? If you've got a very complex process that you want to illustrate, you're going to want to use the one that has more sides, like the icosahedron, the 20-sided. If you feel like you're doing a much more simple concept, then we go with one with less sides, like the tetrahedron or the hexahedron. So another element to think about too is the conceptual aspect of that. If the shape or the form it relates to kind of what you would like to instruct on, then I would look for ways to make that synonymous, right? So I'm doing that with my hexahedron. You can't take my idea, sorry. It's like patented, I think. I don't know, maybe not. Okay, so then we illustrate the process, right? Good, everybody got it? Cool. All right, so here's the deal. Really great video on what makes a good infographic and what makes a bad one. I am not a graphic designer by any means, right? But I'm interested in design, and this is another one of those elements where, you know, I need somebody that I can learn from. And so supplementing what I can give you are people that are design experts, right? So in basic design, it's all about visual communication.
Hey guys, Amon.
This dude's going to help me teach
today.
this.
I want to actually start a new series about a beginner's guide to creating shareable infographics. I just recently did a 3-part series about how to create compelling presentations, and of course, it's time to do one about infographics. Now, the word infographics, in the last 5 years, has skyrocketed, and you kind of hear it, and it is a big part of visual communication now. And so I think it deserves its own series, and I'm going to be doing probably about 6 or 7 videos. But to start off with, the first thing I want to do, rather than jumping into showing you how to create infographics, is to show you what makes a cool infographic. So what makes a good infographic pretty much comes down to an effective infographic. Effective infographics are composed of a few different attributes. They're well designed, they tell a good story, and also they are easy to understand. They give you a visual aspect of content in a manner that is easy and snackable. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is that an effective infographic tells you a good story. So as with presentations, you've got to tell a story through infographics. Infographics are
We've already done this in a few projects, right? We've done this. We've worked on the idea of
they're basically
creating
tall versus
stories.
multiple slides. This is a very good example. It pretty much actually is, it starts off well. It's about 5 minutes about your digestive system, but the problem is that as you scroll down, as you move down, it ends abruptly, and it kind of has a poor narrative. What you want to do instead is to have a good story to tell. So take readers by the hand and actually guide them through the visuals. This one about airport tags, it actually tells you the story throughout the process. So as you go through, it tells you different aspects of how to get through an airport and different tips and guides on hacking through an airport. Now, number 2 is you want to take your users on a predefined journey. So where do you start and where do you end?
So one thing we have to think about with that is, since this is a 3-dimensional interactive thing, right? People need to understand where the beginning is, where the end is, where to go from there. You may have to cue that, signal that in some way, shape, or form when you create your illustrations, right? In this situation, it's like a flat map, right? And they've got numbers, that helps us, it orders things. So thinking about the journey, thinking about how you want people to look through things, very similar to movement when we use that in aesthetic expression.
This one is not really a great example. The problem with this infographic is that there really is no sense of the beginning and end, and it kind of looks like a soup of letters and numbers. The problem is that by just looking at it a few seconds, you have a hard time understanding what has been, what has been related to you. Now, however, this example here, this one, what it does is it gives you it allows you to communicate your message effectively. It is composed of harmonious colors. It's not a very complex design. It's actually very simple. But at the end of
I want you guys to think simple on this, right? Because simple is always the best. when you can
Number 3 is
really create a direct.
One of the most common mistakes that I see designers make, non-designers make when they create infographics, is this format where they create a list. In a way, it's a little bit better than a bullet list where you have visuals composed with supplementing the text. But however, at the end of the day, it's not really a true infographic. A good infographic, it uses unconventional angle.
I really like this one. And really what I'm wanting you guys to understand here is that he's critiquing stuff. He's showing you bad infographics, good ones. I like this one because everything's separated out nicely. I can read it really well. I get the idea that they're all going to go in the same area and it's going to create a recipe of some kind. So it's unique. It's not like a normal cookbook, right?
Supposed to inform your audience. So this one I really love. Basically, it tells you the ingredients of chicken noodle ramen. So what it's done is taken the ingredients and broken it down into one simple, easy to understand, snackable visual. So that's a perfect example. You want to provide a new angle whenever you can. Number 4 is you want to have practical value.
So to me, when he talks about snackable, right, and he talks more about stuff that I don't feel like is very applicable to what we're doing, but basically I want you to see the good design, the bad design elements. Too much information, not enough information, how easy and simplistic is it to read, that kind of thing. But when he says snackable, I think instead of like eating a 5-course meal, say, you're eating something that is quicker to digest, so to speak. So that's what we want out of your project. It should be easy to digest. Now, all this stuff's copyrighted, okay? But luckily, I'm an educator for educational resources, right? But what I want you guys to do is real fast, right? With these infographics, good, bad, confusing. What do you guys think? Laura says good design. Anybody disagree with her? No? Like you can read it, okay? It's easy to understand, it's very linear, right? Okay? So creative process. What about this one? Good flow. What's the best thing about this one? The illustrations. Yeah. I like the illustration because it shows, the procedure of the house going up, right? And so, again, good flow, simplistic. What do you guys think? Is there enough information there for us to read? Too much information? Not enough? I don't mean that kind of tea.
With the other ones, there was they were put around separately. This one's just one.
I see the word process here, right? I don't really see a process. I see a step or a stage in the process, but there's a lot more that goes to that. We know that from like 6th grade sex ed, right? So offset printmaking. So this is how newspapers are printed. But would you know that if I didn't tell you that? Not really. You'd have to have a lot of specific knowledge here. Like the ink rollers here, the water rollers here. Lithography is all about oil versus ink. If you didn't, or oil versus water. If you didn't know that, you wouldn't be able to realize that through the infographic. What about this one? I feel like this one's fairly simple, okay? Right? It's got the ingredients, but it doesn't really talk about necessarily how it goes from this raw ingredient stage to the chocolate bar. There are more steps in that process, right? I thought this one was really pretty good because of the cutaway illustrations on this. They're simplistic, right? They're numbered. It doesn't really talk very much about all the basic ingredients, but some more examples. And again, I feel like some of these are not as descriptive as they could be, right? Because I guess this is what, purification of natural water. This one was a little confusing when I looked at it. It's way too much information. And this question mark here, I'm hoping you guys get a job, instead of like, what do I do with my education now? So this one's all about making paper, right? So maybe just enough visual information to get what we need out of this. So enough context. So if you're thinking about things that are very specialized, like scientific processes, I would make sure that it's very well represented. Because when I see bacillus, whatever up there, I don't know what that means, right? So be specific when you're doing that kind of thing. Well, this one, overwhelming. pretty colorful. But I mean, it's engaging. Still, it pulls me in. I want to take a look at all those little subsets and things like that. But I think it's a little too much information, right? So I would think as simple as possible. Love the concept on this one because it's talking about the effect of pharmacological pollution in the sea. And so I love how the fish is actually made up of the gills. That's a really exciting graphic, but informatics-wise, I mean, this doesn't tell me much, right? I see some percentages on there. You know, probably needs to be more explanatory. I thought this one was a pretty good one. The graphics are simple, easy to read. I thought this one was awfully loud. You know, a lot of stuff in there. It's organized in an interesting way. It's got good movement, all that kind of stuff. Just in case you guys end up being teachers. That's something you'll have to deal with, trust me. But you know, talking about different types of something, you could do that when you're being instructive about a big concept. Maybe you want to break it down into different types of something like this, like choose a broader concept and then talk about the different ways that's diagnosed. So I call these like how-to kind of things, right? We talked about how there are certain things that you don't practice all the time. Like when I was in undergraduate school, I didn't wear a tie unless I had to. And so I remember having to go online and find the diagram on how to tie a Windsor tie and all that kind of, or knot in my tie and all that kind of stuff. Every time I had an interview, I'd have to pull that thing out because I wasn't practicing it enough, right? So this is very familiar to me. So these how-to diagrams and stuff, I feel like these are going to be pretty good for this type of a situation, right? I've coached tennis for years, and a lot of people think serving is just throwing the ball up and whacking it as hard as you can. But there's a lot of mechanics that are involved in that, and this breaks it all down. And what I really like about the design of this is how that movement sort of implies that forward motion as you're stepping into the court to serve. If any of you guys have taken 3D design or any sculpture, you know that that's very process-oriented. So if you have special information, that's something that you feel like you know that you could instruct on, that would be a good topic for you, right? If you don't have that special information, it's time to tap into that curiosity, learn something, do some research, figure out how to do it, and then instruct on it. I'm doing this a lot in my drawing class, you know, step-by-step drawing methods, like when we were working on the still lifes, right? I wanted you guys just to work on contour using all of the methods that we learned how to map that stuff out, and now we're working on the color, right? I had no idea how to make spring rolls, and I love YouTube for this reason, you know. So my wife and I were like, let's do this thing. So to me, this is pretty instructive and works out quite well. Sometimes your steps or your how-to or whatever are very simple. Like for this one, I was looking at how to throw a curveball, right? So it's about position, placement, it's about how you change and move your hand. How to braid your hair. I don't have to worry about that one, luckily. So that's a good thing for me. But I thought it was pretty mystical when I was a young man. Like, how do you do that? You know, it's really not that hard, right, ladies? You know, unless you're like me. And then you don't have the hair. Laura, you want to turn the lights on, please? Thanks. And I want you guys to come on over here, or if you can see, great from where you're at, but you guys that are further away should be like up in here, okay? So what I want you guys to do is start brainstorming now, right? Thinking about the process that you want to illustrate. And so the one that I came up with was draw a box in perspective, because to me that's a pretty simple thing, but it seems magical to people. Like, how can you draw so realistically? It's not that hard if you follow the steps, right? So then I started thinking, okay, well, how would I instruct on this? So you kind of have to think like a teacher in many ways. So we start with the horizon line first, a vanishing point, then draw a square using parallels. And I tried to use as few words as I could with this. I knew that I had to put converging lines here to get them to, like, you know, connect to the vanishing point kind of thing. And then I needed parallels out here. And in looking at this, I feel like I might need an extra slide with that, right? So what have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? And the reason that I was looking at drawing a box in perspective was because I felt like it would be interestingly conceptual to instruct on how to draw a box or a cube shape on a hexahedron, a cube, right? So when I did that, I laid out the idea that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares, okay? And then I figure out what I need to get on each one, okay? Does that make sense? So then I also need to be thinking about how do I want people that are gonna interact with this, my audience, my viewer, to progress through those steps, right? Again, maybe arrows, maybe numbers on there, right? I wouldn't put like step 1 here and step 2 all the way on the other side. I would make it to where it's a lot easier to read. We often read left or right, or we'll read down from the top kind of thing. So for some of you guys, maybe it's only 4 steps in the process, tetrahedron. If you really want to stress yourself out, right, use the icosahedron. You got 20 steps there. You do major complex processes, nuclear fission, that kind of thing, right? I know you guys are like thrilled about that stuff, for sure. Okay, so remember that these diagrams that I made up here, remember those are good resources for you when you're thinking about how many sides are on there if you don't remember how these things came together. So you need to figure out and brainstorm today the process that you want to develop on one of these solids. So also we need to work on the craftsmanship of the vertexes. And so these areas that we glued together, right? Remember how I was telling you that we were going to fill them, okay? What we're going to be using is joint compound on that, and it's basically just like wool putty. And I put some joint compound on this one earlier, and you guys see how it cracked a little bit, right? Okay. Sometimes that happens when you lay a thick coating on, and so it's sandable, and that's why we're using it. So once I get a coat of that on there, I'm just going to go ahead and sand the edges. It's paintable too. You can actually scrape with X-Acto knives as well. You got to decide how you want your points to be. If you want them pointy, you can use the joint compound to actually develop a point out of that. I'm probably just going to go with flat edge at some point, right? As far as media, your choice. Okay. What I don't want is graphite drawing on these because it doesn't show up very well. It doesn't look very well. I would go with Sharpie or something like heavier, like maybe black colored pencil or different types of markers, ink, whatever. You can paint them if you want to as well, that's fine. So you want to brainstorm, figure out your process, right? And then perfect the solid that you are going to illustrate this one on, right? And so all you have to do with this joint compound, so I'm going to go into another vertex here. It's best if you, I'm sure none of you guys have like done, maybe you have, if you've ever done any like interior construction stuff. It's important to try to get this stuff spackled in as smooth and clean as possible. So you don't have to do a lot of sanding, but what I do is I just kind of like work it on there, and I use the really flat aspect of the popsicle stick or whatever tool that I'm using, implement, to try to get it as smooth as possible. And you can work it for a little while before it starts drying. If you have a whole bunch of, I'm just going to set that down to dry. If you have a whole bunch of glue that's sticking out, or you have a messy situation like this, I would use an X-Acto knife to cut as much of that off as you can. I would use an X-Acto knife to cut as much of that off as you can, without cutting the paper, hopefully. And so I can kind of help you guys with that process. So yeah, I would get everything off of here that you can so it's smooth, and then go ahead and seal up the corners, right? Okay, so 2 things you got to do, right? Brainstorm and clean up the solid that you're going to go ahead and illustrate on. Cool? So then you've got the other 4, right? We'll talk about that later, end of class kind of thing. So you have until next Thursday. I believe that's our final, okay? And we're going to critique on these. We're going to try them out and see how instructive they are, right? So we're going to exchange and do a similar peer critique to what we've done in the past. Cool? All right, questions? Now? What can you do? What are your limitations? What can you get away with? That's what I'd be thinking right now. Yes, no, maybe. Think about a process, right? Think about something complex, how you can pare it down. Isolate it to very concrete, simple steps. Cool? If you got to do some research, do it. I got all 3 glue guns plugged in. I'll leave this open for you guys to use, so let's get on it, right? Awesome. Thank you, Riley.
Yep.